Good evening to everybody. We're going to get ready to start. And for those who are picking up handouts, feel free to find a seat. Sister Jeanne, her presentation will be separate from the handouts, so you don't necessarily need the handouts to follow along with her presentation, and they'll be there at the end. So we have a couple seats left. Where? One here, and one here, and one there with Luke in the middle, and one there in the middle. So it's like one or two chairs at each place, and in the back there's about 10 chairs. Okay, with that we'll get started. So I'd like to introduce Sister Jeanne from the Sisters of Mercy, who's here to talk with us about a very relevant and current topic in the area of human trafficking. And we're just so pleased that she's giving up her evening to come and share her knowledge with us and grow in our understanding of what is in fact right in front of us here in Overland Park. At the end of her presentation, we'll have a detective from the Overland Park Police Department who will be able to come up and join Sister Jeanne to give some information about statistics and some information about what's happening right here beyond the global problem that Sister Jeanne addresses. So with that, we'll turn it over to Sister Jeanne. Thank you.
All right. As she said, I am a Sister of Mercy. I understand there's someone here who came tonight because she knows Sister Donna Ryan. I also know Sister Donna Ryan. I know her very well, so we'll chat later. Sister Donna worked in the city with a really awesome woman who is a survivor of trafficking. And the two of them founded the Justice Project, which works with women on the streets. And as far as I know, they're the only group working with transgendered persons. So it's a pretty awesome program. Unfortunately, Sister Donna had to move to our retirement center in Omaha. So she does it by proxy, long distance, and phone. So anyway, there are a number of Sisters of Mercy engaged in human trafficking work. The ones I'm familiar with are in Michigan, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and California. But I also belong to the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, which is a national group of sisters. 15 of us founded it about 6 years ago. And we're now a not-for-profit, and the 15 of us are the board of directors, and we're scattered all over the U.S. It's a great network, so if I get a call from somebody here that needs assistance, I can go out to our group and say, can anybody help me with X? And that's how we make it work. So it's a pretty awesome group. I'm really happy to be here to share with you. Some of you may know Sister Margaret Nackey. She's a sister of St. Joseph, and she is my connection with you all. She now lives 4 hours away from here, and she emailed and said, can you do this so I don't have to drive 4 hours? Yeah, I can do this. I live north of the river. Although it felt like 4 hours on Interstate 35 tonight. You all do that probably on a regular basis. What I will be talking about tonight is primarily domestic trafficking as opposed to international trafficking. So I talk mostly about what's happening here in the U.S., not necessarily the bringing in, although we know that is happening also to a great extent. I use a PowerPoint. Some of you have already discovered the handouts. It's always a guessing game for me on how many to bring. What's the number I should bring? So some of them are gone, you'll have to share. But there are a lot of fact sheets left. There's some how bad can a chocolate bunny be? That's fair trade chocolate. And it's an effort that we always put out to help address labor trafficking. There's a lot on social media, which looks like most of it's gotten picked up already. I have a number of website sheets. I also have a really awesome brochure. Your Attorney General in the state of Kansas has done a lot of work to address human trafficking. His department, people in his department. And when I contacted him for 100 brochures, I had them in 2 days. So that says a whole lot. And there are some of those still over there on the table. There's a number of brochures over there. We know that human trafficking is modern-day slavery. We know that it happens in the U.S. It happens everywhere. It's going to be here. 95th and Metcalf used to be one of our busiest corners. because you have convention hotels.
Oh.
And that's going to draw a certain amount of it. What we do know about human trafficking with adults, you have force, fraud, or coercion. One or more than one of those things happens, it's considered trafficking. As I pointed out, it's also happening beyond the U.S., and sometimes the victims will not come forward out of fear for their trafficker, the predator, what might happen to them if they do. Normally we talk about human trafficking being either sex trafficking or forced labor trafficking, but it can also include domestic servitude, bonded labor, child labor, and forced marriage. Now, we don't very often hear about any of them other than sex trafficking in the U.S. and labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is not prostitution, and legalizing prostitution does not necessarily reduce the amount of human trafficking. It's not legal in the U.S., but it is legal in some countries. Anyone under the age of 18 that's engaged in commercial sex, forced labor, or certitude is considered a victim of human trafficking, no exceptions. They're a minor. You don't have to have force, fraud, or coercion. They're considered trafficked. And another key piece of trafficking is the individual who is the victim is a piece of property. They're a commodity. So they're bought, they're sold, when they're worn out, they're discarded, because there's always someone else to be picked up. Here are some risk factors in trafficking. I talk a lot with high school and college kids. And bullying is a major thing. I will be talking more about social media, and law enforcement would be the first one standing up saying, yeah, social media is a major problem. So I talk with people, kids in particular, about meeting someone online and the hazards and the risks of doing that. We know in other countries, escape from war, persecution, sometimes natural disasters. So those are all possible factors. One or more may be present in trafficking. We do now talk much more about pornography and trafficking, and these are the reasons why. There is a supply and demand issue. We're trying to break down the supply, the demand for it. If we break demand, then we don't need to have more persons who are then victimized. Pornography directly informs what happens to trafficking victims. Often trafficking victims are used to produce pornography. And then traffickers or sex buyers get ideas from watching pornography and then force their victims to engage in similar things. And then traffickers often sell videos to porn sites. These were a little startling the first time you see them. The average age of porn exposure for men is around age 13. And an estimated of 90 young men under the age of 18 have seen porn, as have 60% of women of the same age. It's difficult to tell by watching it whether that's consensual on that video or it's non-consensual action. Anybody can be a victim. Generally, victims are people who are vulnerable in some way, but that's not always the case. I have a DVD that has the story of a young white girl from rural Oregon, a student taking college prep, doing all the right things. And she's a waitress and makes really good tips because she's cute and she's friendly. An older man comes in on a regular basis. He's gaining all sorts of information. And then he hands that off to a 24-year-old who is a trafficker, who comes in and tries to get her and nearly succeeds, but she told a friend and a friend told his parents who told her parents, so there was an intervention. So it can be anybody, but generally they're persons from vulnerable groups. We've talked a little bit about the internet. It is the major source nowadays for predators, and they're very, very skilled at it. Sextortion is if you post something, I say this to the kids, the kind of pictures that you post is what the predator could be looking for. And the girls say, well, but it's my body, I can put up any picture I want. And, oh, I deleted it. Well, it doesn't go away. So they will be looking for that, and the predator might say, I saw your picture, and if you don't do what I want you to do, here's what I'm gonna do. And it's like, I know where you live, I know where you go to school, I know your church group, I know your family, whatever it might be, there's some sort of threat there. Smartphones and mobile devices are a quick way to connect to the internet. Now, this is where the kids don't like me, because I'll tell them that they should be turning those into their parents. Now, you all are the parents, the grandparents, the foster parents. Where are your children's smartphones at night? Where are their computers? Do you know their passwords? Those are all things you need to know. Computers should always be out in the public arena so that they are not connecting to the internet when you're not around. These are some of the apps. Apps are not in and of themselves bad, it's how they get used. And so these are some that predators will go looking for potential victims. There is a more extensive list over on the table. There's still a few copies of that left. Other hunting grounds. You'll find predators or traffickers on campuses, etc. The story I always tell here is the one about the mall. I was teaching a group of college students in Cedar Rapids, Iowa at Mount Mercy University, which is predominantly rural kids. And so I was telling them, it depends on how you respond if someone comes up to you, what the predator will do. So if you're a young girl, you get all embarrassed and you're looking at your feet, you don't know quite what to do or say. The predator thinks you're more vulnerable and they'll keep at it. If you stand up straight and say, well, thanks, I'm glad you think I have pretty eyes, but you know what, I'm not interested. Ann goes up in the back of the room and this girl says, you know what, that happened to me at the mall. And I said, what'd you do? And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, sister, I won't tell you what I said to him. She's fine. Okay, what do you need to talk to your grandchildren, your children, foster children, students, any youth that you might be responsible for? If they decide to meet someone online after they've chatted, one, I tell them, don't do it, but some of them are going to do it anyway. So if they are, make sure they notice, go to a public place, tell you or their friends, somebody in the family, where they're going, when do they think they're going to come home. And because a potential victim could innocently connect with a predator online. And that's one of the unfortunate things. Also, particularly with older students, college students, if they're out, keep an eye on their drink. Because, you know, you see on TV where they drop tablets in drinks. Well, that really does happen. So you can have date rape drinks and whatever. Instant love is too good to be true, okay? And sometimes that's the handle that a predator will use. We see a lot in gang-related trafficking where the gang passes themselves as family. We're now your family, therefore. And I do have a DVD I use with high school kids. I'll be using it at Crystal Ray next week in Kansas City. It's gang trafficking in gangs. That's appropriate to some schools and not to others. And a youth should always have a safety plan. If they're out, one, follow their instincts. If it feels suspicious, it doesn't feel right, then they need to get to a safe place. They need, if they're in the mall, go find the mall security If they're in the airport, find airport security or a screener or someone that's trusted and tell them. Make sure they have a safe way to get home if they leave. Now, we all probably heard the story over the weekend of the girl who thought she had an Uber ride, got in the wrong car. So they need to know what an Uber signal sign looks like and what they need to do to be safe if they're doing Uber, or in our case, Zipcar, and any number of those kinds of rides nowadays. If they don't feel safe, they're in a bar, they should go to the bartender, ask the bartender to either call a cab for them or call home. Call somebody that they trust to come and get them. Stay with the bartender until their trusted ride arrives. They should always have their phone, and by the way, that should be charged. It's not much good if it's not charged. They should have some money, and they should never rely on a stranger for a ride. That's really not smart. They need to know and obey internet usage rules that you have at home or at school. They should not share personal information or personal photos online. When I was presenting at Mercy High in Omaha, it was right after Claire McCaskill and Senator Portman had gotten Backpage taken down. And so I was sort of bragging because we don't have very many successes that way. And one of the girls said, "Am I on Backpage?" I said, "What have you been posting?" Well, she obviously isn't. She hadn't never been on Backpage. I suggested that she never go there. And the other thing I'd say about Backpage, you know what Backpage is?
No.
Oh, you want to buy and sell people. They were buying and selling persons. Here's a picture. It might really be your picture, and it might be a enhanced picture, the description, and the contact info. Now, that segment of Backpage is no longer on Backpage proper. It's a place you go to buy and sell stuff. And what happened with it is they just renamed it, and it's gone underground. Chris Wade, that is part of the Justice Project in Kansas City, just looked at me and said, "Yeah, that was great. It was good publicity. Got it out there." She said, "Jeanne, there's about 15 more places people can do that." And predators know where they are. So do the buyers and the sellers both know. And they should talk to an adult that they trust. Hopefully it's parent, could be grandparents, could be a guardian, could be a counselor at school, somebody in religious ed, whatever, if they're worried about anything. So communication is a real key in helping keep the kids safe. If there are boundaries set, they need to know what they are. They need to keep them. They need to give you their passwords. And I say to the kids, if you tell people that, it shows that you trust them and that you are trustworthy. Traffickers can be anybody. My story that goes with the traffickers was at our high school in Chicago. I did not know, I have to confess, who Snoop Dogg was. Okay? Found a picture of the guy on the internet, didn't know it was he. Had it up here on the screen. The girls got hysterical. It was a girls' school. They got hysterical, and I thought, oops. So I said to them, he's not a predator, he's not a trafficker, but keep in mind he could be, because anybody could be. I thought that was a pretty good save. They like the internet because no one knows them. They're anonymous out on the internet. That's the other problem, and I don't think I have anything in the presentation. Before major sporting events during those times, we do see an increase in trafficking. They try to tell us that's not the case, but it is. And one of the reasons is because there's a large group of people in town, unfortunately it's often men, and they're anonymous. They're out on the internet and they're buying a person in order to have a meeting at the hotel. Chris Wade, our survivor in Kansas City who works at the Justice Project, when she was being trafficked, one of the things she did was an escort in hotels in Kansas City. And she's been out a long, long time. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we said to Chris, well, we're all here for a meeting, and why don't we all meet down at the Regency or one of the hotels downtown? And she said, I can't. And we said, why? She said, I used to do business there. They might recognize me. So that's part of the challenge with this. Human trafficking is very, very profitable. As much as $152 billion in 2017. Yeah. And it's the second fastest growing criminal industry in the world. What's faster growing than human trafficking?
Drugs.
Not drugs. Guns, yep.
Oh, yeah.
And here's why. If you buy drugs, you sell them, they're gone. Oh, I gotta go buy more. If I buy a person or a gun, I can just keep using it. So I make more money. Trafficking or slavery is illegal in every country in the world. And as I noted earlier, we need to reduce the demand. And we need to have some more serious punishment for the predators and the buyers. A slap on the hand, maybe a month in jail, maybe overnight, a couple $1,000, that's not going to change it.
How do you reduce the demand?
You punish them more, you arrest more of them. They make the buyer the criminal, not the person who's being sold. In Missouri, and I don't know in Kansas because I'm not as familiar with your laws, but in Missouri, if a woman is picked up on the streets for prostitution, she is considered a criminal and she gets a criminal record. Now she's being trafficked, she's a victim, not a criminal. Same thing can happen to kids. So they're considered criminal. Well, a kid is not a criminal. We have a national hotline. It's based in Washington, D.C. Its address, its location is not publicly known because predators don't like them. They're interfering in business, so they would put them out of business if they could. So it's an unknown place. It's open 24/7. During major sporting events, they about double the number of people answering the phone. They have information all over the country so that if you call the hotline, they can say to you, okay, in Kansas, here's who you need to connect with. Or if you're in Missouri or Nebraska or wherever you are. So that's in 6 months, that's the number of calls. What we do know is that over the years, because we can compare back to about 2010, 2012, the number of calls to the hotline and the number of cases being tried has more than doubled, which says to us, not that there's more incidences of trafficking, but there's more awareness because we do education and there's more of it being reported, which in turn will help reduce the demand. So people say to us, how do you keep doing it? Well, we keep doing it because we know we're making a difference. We're also protecting victims. I don't work directly with victims, but there are a number of groups and people who do that in our area and beyond. In Kansas, so far, halfway through 2018, those are the latest numbers we can get. There were 84 calls to the hotline and 37 cases. So they were verifiable, credible, and they were looked at, reported, and so on. This is a statistic about runaway kids because they're really vulnerable. They're highly at risk. In 2017, 1 out of 7 endangered runaways were likely to be child sex trafficking victims. The children, 88% of those kids were in the care of social services or foster care when they ran. So that's the other whole area that we're looking at. How do we protect the kids in foster care? I don't always read the Kansas sections of the Star, but some of those headlines you can't miss. And y'all have some serious problems over here with that. If a runaway ends up on the street, they're usually picked up within 48 hours. So again, when I'm talking to kids, if you're thinking about running, one, don't do it. If you're gonna do it anyway, have a safe place to go. If your friend's gonna run, make sure they have a safe place to go. Otherwise, it's pretty risky. Globally, there's about 40 million people, including children, who are victims of human trafficking. It's pretty evenly split between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And 95% of the victims experience physical, sexual violence during trafficking. And almost all of them, particularly in sex trafficking, are controlled with drugs and violence. So then you have the problem of sobriety if the woman gets free, or the man. It's mostly women, but men are also trafficked, as are young boys. And sometimes they're as young as 5 or 6. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, the younger the victim, the more money they earn for the predator. These are the people who call the hotline, and we have more victims themselves calling now than we had in the past. NGOs are not-for-profit groups. So it'd be people like the Sisters of Mercy, the Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, Dawn's Place, Restoration House, those kinds of places. So what do? I always get the question. The other question I always get, by the way, is how did I get to doing this? How did Sister get to doing human trafficking, talking about sex? It happened because I've always done, no matter what my ministry, I'm a social worker by training, but no matter what my ministry, I've always been engaged in some form of addressing social justice issues. And just prior to being a justice advocate on human trafficking, against human trafficking, I was on my community, the Sisters of Mercy West Midwest Communities Justice Team. And we have 5 areas that we focus on. One of them is women and children. And the 3 of us took those 5 areas and divided them up. And then we added healthcare and poverty because those were key issues at the time. So I had healthcare, I had poverty, I had women and children. Those were my primary areas. And then I had to know a little more about immigration, nonviolence, racism, earth, and environment. So I finally said, I think I'd like to become more of an expert in one area and not try to be a generalist. And at the time, that was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we were not adequately addressing human trafficking. So I said it fits with women and children, it fits with poverty, and that's where I went. So I'm sort of the go-to person for the Sisters of Mercy in the Americas. And we have a group now working in Haiti. It's called Mercy Focus on Haiti. And they called me the other day and said, we got to talk. Because there's a whole program down there that goes under the guise of something else, but it's really trafficking. So again, you have poverty, you have vulnerability, you have victims of natural disasters in Haiti, so it makes them vulnerable. Okay, here's what y'all can do, and this is what you're doing tonight. You're becoming informed. Be a conscientious consumer. I will talk a little bit about labor trafficking, fair trade, buying made in the USA. Yeah, it all costs more than those shirts made in Bangladesh and Mexico, but it's an important element to breaking down labor trafficking. Build awareness about the issue, how it can be addressed. Talk with your peers, your family, your friends, how there can be at risk. How about self-respect, self-confidence, self-esteem? Be sure you teach your boys especially about respecting women, because that's part of our problem. And then in general, showing respect for others. Engage in advocacy. We don't have a lot of laws on the books, but when we do, we go after them. The current one we're working on is against violence against women. On this brochure, there are some bills that Kansas has successfully enacted. So they're in the middle. And there are 3 of them. That's huge. So your Attorney General has done really, really fine work. Provide direct assistance to victims. I always have a caveat that goes with that, which I will talk about. Sponsor events or educational opportunities, which is what's happening tonight. We have resource materials, and if you didn't get something that you want, I can probably get it to you. Some of it I have electronically, some of it I don't. Explore possible, well, the key is partnering with somebody, because they can assist you in exploring possible actions, forming networks, coalitions. Never, if you see a victim, do not try to intervene yourself. 2 reasons. One, it puts you at risk, and it puts them at risk. We have a sweet little sister who thought it'd be really cool to go to a rest area on the interstate and share scripture with victims, with the girls who were being prostituted at the truck stop. She said it on a conference call. You could hear an audible gasp from everybody on the line, because that would put that girl at risk, huge risk, and would put the sister at risk as well for interfering. I do talk about fair trade because it's very important. U.S. Department of Labor has identified 148 goods from 75 countries made by forced and child labor. So if you go to the Department of Labor, you can pull up that list. I got a list yesterday from a Baptist group in Australia who will be putting out a guide also about trafficked goods. Fair trade goods are goods that are produced by artisans, growers, and so on, who are paid a fair wage for their product or their material good, whatever it is, so that they're not forced into labor trafficking. In Old Overland Park is the 10,000 Villages store. That's fair trade. It's not as cheap as Walmart, nor are most made in USA goods as cheap as those made in other areas. Labor trafficking can include debt bondage, forced labor, involuntary child labor, including child soldiers. We don't see that in the US, but we do see it in other countries. They will use violence, threats, lies, and other forms of coercion. These are some of the industries where we see trafficked laborers. There is also a serious effort, which sisters, again, of multiple communities have undertaken, as well as some other folks, to educate hotel and motel personnel. There's a not-for-profit called ECPAT, which is the acronym for Ending Childhood Abuse and Trafficking. There's a code of conduct. We literally take it with us when we go to hotels and say, did your hotel sign this? You can get that online too, by the way. Just go to ecpatusa.org. And then the Sisters of Mercy in most sisters communities will not hold an event in a hotel that has not signed it, because they then know what to look for and what to do if they see it. So let's say you come into the hotel and you have 4 25, 30-year-olds with you. We never see them. You go out, but we never see them because they're in 1 or 2 hotel rooms being trafficked. So the hotel is trained to watch for that. Doesn't look like a real family, there's something wrong here. Or they'll look at the victim and say, that's not right. She's pale, she's not looking, he's doing all, he or she, whoever's the trafficker, is doing all the answering. We also see that in hospitals. I don't know if any of you are healthcare people, but almost every healthcare system and every healthcare facility is training their people. And predominantly they start with ER because that's where they're going to show up. And they train them in what to look for. They train them to separate the victim from whoever brought them in, because if whoever brought them in stays in the room, the victim isn't going to be able to say much. So they wouldn't be safe. So you make up reasons and excuses. We're going to take this woman down to x-ray. She may or may not need an x-ray, but it gets her away from the predator and then they can talk to her. Some victims are ready to move on, some are not, because we have the trauma bond happening. And so sometimes you'll say, oh, we're going to save that woman. Well, she may not be ready yet. We do have domestic servants. You might have nannies. We know that nail salons are pretty notorious for trafficked persons. They're brought into the country and forced to work. Generally, anybody who is trafficked, they don't keep the money. The woman might be sent out on the street. She's expected to earn $500 that night. If she doesn't, she's either physically punished or sent back out until she does. A predator will take the money. I'll hold it and keep it safe for you. Yeah. She never sees it. Same thing can happen with factory workers. Here are a few other practical ways. What are the red flags, which I have listed? Truck stops are pretty notorious. My story for that one, again, was a sister. Her nephew is a truck driver, and he was parked at a truck stop, and a 16-year-old came over to his truck and said, anything I can do for you tonight? And he said, no, but there's a couple things I could do for you. I'd like to paddle you, which of course he couldn't. And I'm going to call your mother. She said, you can't call my mother. She's in the truck next door.
Oh my God.
Now in the U.S. we don't see so much selling of children. We see it internationally a lot because they're so poor and they're lied to. Let me take your child, I'll give you X amount of money, she will get an education, etc. She gets an education, but not what you think. And that's part of our problem with our project in Haiti. They're promised education, but that's really not what's happening. And I've already talked about don't confront the trafficker or alert the victim, because that can be dangerous. I do talk, and it puts us in a real conundrum because we don't know for sure what to do unless we know who to call. Generally we say if it looks suspicious, call law enforcement. Our law enforcement has been trained. We have more and more of our law enforcement people who know what trafficking is, who know that the victims are victims and not criminals, and they know what to do. The problem with an illegal immigrant is if they're not documented, they can be deported. So there's a lot of, you kind of have to look at that and try to figure out who do we call. So in my case, I have 2 or 3 people that are sharp on immigration, so I know what to do. These are what you might see in a human trafficking victim. They're not going to look at you. They aren't going to interact with you. They may be malnourished. They might look like they haven't slept. They usually have no money and no ID. In cases with victims who are brought in from other countries, their documentation usually is taken away from them, so they don't have it even if they can escape. A lot of verbal threats, emotional abuse. They're treated with a lot of disrespect. They may receive a lot of really cool gifts. Ooh, really nice dress or shoes or jewelry or whatever. A lot of them can't do anything unless their predator tells them they can. One of the videos I've seen, the woman says, I couldn't even wash my hair until he told me I could. Okay, tell an appropriate authority, call 911 if you're in a situation and there's no other alternative. I've talked about mall security, airport security. You see the police officer going down the street in the car, wave them down, tell them what you've seen and where you saw it. National hotline is 1-888-373-7888. And then there's Kansas Human Trafficking Information Referral Line. There's a new group out now that is putting out black and white chapsticks that has, it looks like it has a barcode. The numbers on the barcode are that telephone number. Because the predators will get on that eventually. But until they do, the woman can carry a piece of chapstick and not appear to be doing anything she shouldn't. A lot of places are also posting have a couple of them here. Catholic Health Association put out posters that include that phone number. And Catholic Health Association will send you as many of those as you want, free of charge. I probably ordered 400 or 500 of them in my time. The kids at Mount Mercy got permission to post them in their dorm. So there are ways to do that. And then these again are some websites. They are actually on the list. There are a few of them left here. Truckers Against Trafficking are another ally. They're out on the highway. They have great materials. They often put materials in the rest areas. And they have been known to report a number of cases and situations. There's ECPAT. Polaris Project is where the hotline is based. Shared Hope International works only with trafficked children. But those are some of the real key ones. We never put out a website that we haven't vetted, so we know it's okay to have it out there. Here are some of your Kansas partners. You have the Attorney General's Office, Wichita State Center, KU's ASHTI project. I was actually interviewed by them. Kansas Department for Children and Families, ICT SOS or Human Trafficking, Restoration House, which is a safe house for women. Veronica's Voice is working on getting a safe house. I don't think they've accomplished that yet. Casey Case is a coalition of groups primarily in Kansas. Some of us on the Missouri side also belong. These are people in the Kansas City area, be the Missouri side. The Justice Project I've talked about with Chris Wade. Cornerstone of Care. Synergy is one of the few addressing youth. Restoration House, I believe, is working on getting a house for the youth as well. Exodus Cry, Casey Hope, Stop Trafficking, and obviously I'm on there. And I think you picked them up. I also advocate cell phone agreements, contracts between parents and kids. And so both sides know what the expectation is. And all of us working on trafficking, that entire group of people are collaborative. We don't do any turf protection simply because there's so much work to be done and we're all doing pieces of the work. So however we can help each other, we do. And that's it. Okay, that was pretty good for me. Questions or comments? Yes?
It seems that you can never eradicate it completely because there's always new people coming into the fold, right?
That's correct.
So you're just trying to minimize it.
We're trying to prevent it.
Yeah, but that won't work completely.
But if we save 1, 2, 10, 15 people, it's working. We don't go for perfection. We'd love it. We'd love it if it was totally gone. But it's one of the oldest businesses in the world. It has been going on forever. So, you know, your old brothels from way back when are part of that. But we're working at it. And that's hopeful. And there's my police officer.
Hi, Sister Jeanne. I figured this would be a great time for me to come up real quick and introduce myself as well so I can help out with some questions and bring it back local.
Yeah. What you got?
It's always good to hear a friendly voice here. Sister Jeanne knows all the same people that I know, so it's kind of fun. I'm Derek Wilczek. I'm a police detective with the City of Overland Park. I've been employed by the City of Overland Park for 15 years now and been working in our Vice unit, working against trafficking and commercial sex, basically doing everything I can to make Overland Park an untenable environment for any type of commercial sex for about 7 years now. Part of that's blossomed a little bit. I work with the FBI in Kansas City on a task force that's designed to combat trafficking, labor, and sex, just like Sister Jeanne talked about. Part of that is running around doing education pieces with the public like these. I get to teach a lot of police officers across the state of Kansas, and I also get to serve on the Kansas Attorney General's Human Trafficking Advisory Board. So great words from Sister Jeanne as well about the Attorney General's office. Partisan politics and all that stuff aside, Kansas has improved their grade when it comes to evaluating human trafficking and identifying ways to protect the public. and awareness things and all these education pieces and what we're actually doing elevated that grade a ton over the last few years, so it's kind of a great thing. So let me kind of just give you a quick little snapshot here of what we do in Overland Park, what we do around our general Kansas City area to help try to take this scourge away from our public and our population. So there's not very many of us, just like Sister Jeanne talked about. It's kind of a niche thing. When you get started in investigating trafficking cases or working these, you get kind of stuck off to the side doing that. So I partner with folks from Kansas City, Missouri, from our Vice unit over there, from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. We got some folks in Topeka, partners in Wichita, and we really just kind of span around. We join forces a lot to do outreach efforts, to do enforcement efforts, and to investigate cases. And what we found over all these years, and we've kind of honed our skills a little bit, is that more often than not, the people that are working in our area aren't staying in our area. They're traveling place to place because they're following where the demand is, taking that supply out to meet the demand, just like Sister Jeanne talked about. So enforcement efforts here can be anything from a prostitution type of a sting. In Kansas, we don't call it prostitution, we call it selling sexual relations, and that takes maybe some bad connotations associated with that we might affix to a person who was convicted of that crime or who was being investigated for committing that crime. The idea being there that we're looking at a person's actions, we're not trying to slap a label on someone. So they were engaging in that behavior. The same thing goes for buying sexual relations, a person who is interested in paying someone for that type of sexual encounter. And then we call it promoting the sale of sexual relations. And that's going to be like your typical pimping cases as they've been historically. Sister Jeanne talked a lot about how things have evolved through the internet. We still have some street level open air type sex markets in some of our larger cities. Kansas City has a couple places on the Missouri side. Not really anywhere around Overland Park that's very pedestrian friendly, where there's a lot of people just walking around. So that type of model doesn't really function here very well. Instead, it's all based on the internet, just like Sister Jeanne spoke about. The internet has really kind of changed, especially in the last year or so here, because we had some new acts that were put into place, some congressional acts put forward, the FOSTA and SESTA acts, trying to stop online sex trafficking, and that's when Backpage went down. So the FBI seized Backpage during a large investigation because it was this internet website where people were posting advertisements for commercial sex, prostitution as we would call it. And it was basically it was a marketplace for buyers to meet the demand, or the demand to meet the supply, and it was happening like out there just as easy as an internet search. So when that website came down, we thought, okay, great, awesome victory, but just like Sister Jeanne said, it proliferated, it bounced out everywhere else, and now because it's illegal for a site to host those type of things in the United States, what we see is the internet is global, right? It goes all the way around the world. So now we have sites that are hosted overseas in different countries. And what can the US do about that to regulate it? Not much, because guess what? We value our free speech and we want access to all this information. So all these extra hurdles that have come forward, thinking we were doing this really great job, and instead we've kind of put ourselves behind the cart a little bit trying to investigate those, because now we have to not only go out and try to find victims, but we also have to go find where people are meeting. You know, where is the supply meeting the demand, and where is the market changed? So all these extra pieces that have come. Anything I missed? Okay. Let's jump into some questions, if you guys don't mind.
What kind of people are they? Can you identify that class of person? The trafficker.
No. Just like Sister Jeanne, it's anyone. It's anybody who has taken on these characteristics and says, look, I have an opportunity to take advantage of someone in a bad situation. They have some type of vulnerability, and it could be a personal vulnerability, much like she spoke about. It could be a situational vulnerability where they're at a spot where they just don't have enough money to get by, or they can't take care of themselves, or they don't have a place to stay. And so they look to someone else and put their trust in them to help them get through that situation. And this person on the other side decides that they're some type of a trafficker, or they're going to take advantage of this person. So they say, you know what? No problem, you can stay on my couch, but you have to do this for me. You have to go have sex with this person to earn me money. So in order to say that it's this type of person, or this is what they look like, it's impossible. It's one of those things that we can't do, because it's a person making that decision. We know that the United States, even Johnson County, Kansas here, is made up of a very diverse population. So anybody can do it. Anybody can commit a crime. Anybody can take advantage of a person. Anybody can be a trafficker. And we see those cases. We see adult black males, we see adult white males, we see adult Hispanic males, we see adult females, adult, of all races and ethnicities. We see kids, trafficking kids, people under the age of 18 taking advantage of their peers in situations. So to answer the question is that it could be anyone. And it's not necessarily your neighborhood registered offender who might have been convicted of some type of a contact offense necessarily. We don't necessarily see that those type of offenses cause them to somehow be a trafficker of any way. So really, it's anyone. Anything to add to that?
You got the kids.
Okay.
The kids is happening in the schools.
Right.
So, yeah.
Sir?
Yeah, with the Big 12 tournament, a few weeks ago, NCAA, do you guys put things in place to help monitor, to help minimize, to be proactive?
Yeah, so I can speak for law enforcement on that point. We obviously try to pay good attention, just like Sister Jeanne says, when there's a market influx of people showing up, there's an opportunity for all of this demand that's there, so the supply is going to travel to meet that. I can't say that every time that we see a spike in advertisements online or we see a spike in the activity, but it's there and the opportunity exists and we pay attention to it for that very reason. So it's there, we pay attention to it, we check extra advertisements. We have, it's not just police detectives who do my job, just so you know, we have support staff, especially with the FBI here in Kansas City, some analysts that are out there. Their job is to go out and look for potential victims that might be posted online or check trends or run down our tips or do some extra vetting that happens in the background.
Like, are you
too.
able to, I guess, capture, for lack of a better, catch, for lack of a better term, the people above the people that are being trafficked, like the people that are bringing the...
Very, very much so. That's our goal, right? So our goal isn't necessarily the people who are down here offering the sexual services because we don't necessarily want to criminalize that.
Right.
Kansas has done a great job at enacting statutes to help protect those people. So if you are caught by law enforcement or you're investigated for selling sexual relations, there's an affirmative defense built in that says if I am a victim of trafficking and I can articulate that and help law enforcement out and help them understand that that's the situation, I can't be held criminally liable. So that's a great thing, so it helps protect them. Our goal is to elicit as much information as we can and try to get them to trust us, that people wearing guns and badges. That doesn't happen a lot, right? Because that's just how it is. But we try to build that trust, get the information from them so that we can try to build up the chain a little bit to find out who's taking advantage of them, who's moved them around, and who that enterprise level group that might be there. That's who we're looking for every single time.
And Chris Wade that we were talking about has a degree in criminal justice. She also has the trust of the judges and the courts on the Missouri side. And she has, on occasion, gone in to, what's the word? She goes to court and will say, this is the predator and this is what the predator did, which really puts her at risk. But she will do that because it protects the woman.
And Chris is an advocate in Missouri and in Kansas.
Yeah, she's on both sides.
For sure, and she can serve as an expert witness, somebody who has served in that capacity and has been trafficked herself. So she could be called upon by a prosecuting attorney to try to offer that information to a jury or to a judge or anybody else to help them understand what exactly took place in this case.
Are boys and girls, which is the dividing point? Is there more boys or more girls?
Overwhelmingly, I would say females, Sister Jeanne.
Yeah. When you're talking, his question was whether it was more boys or girls. Generally speaking, in sex trafficking, and things like making pornographic videos, which then leads to it, it's generally girls or women, but not always. Labor trafficking, I think, is probably a little more divided more evenly divided
Very much so.
than sex trafficking. You had a question? Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, well, as a parent, one of the reasons why I came here is kind of figure out, is there kind of like a safe zone from an age standpoint that I can kind of relax a little bit more, and not have to be worried, I live here in Overland Park, and we've had our stories about people cruising neighborhoods and trying to talk with the kids and such, and so we're always on our guard, always, and but I also recognize as humans, everybody can be vulnerable at different times in their life. But I guess where I'm going with this, is there any kind of data that would say, hey, between ages, 8 and 12, there's a lot of these kids, proportionally relative to the others that are being, taken. Is there anything that would kind of show us from an age standpoint, what are the ages of vulnerability where kids are getting scooped?
They used to say 18 to 24, but that's not the case anymore.
When we talk about our traditional circumstances, the one I've described to you that we contacted most often are those commercial sex situations. And it's not because that's the only way to traffic a person, it's because it's an easy way to find a victim. And it looks the strangest to us as the general public and to everyone else, okay? So it's not inherently illegal for a person to go to work every day. So that's why we don't necessarily see reports of labor trafficking a lot. But when we see people engaging in commercial sex, that's why we see it more. So I'll speak to that a little bit, just because that's the most data, the pool that we have to work with. And what I would say is overwhelmingly, the areas of like 14 to 24-ish, though that 10-year age range are about where the bulk of our victims are that we identify. And when I say a victim, that's a victim that we have identified as law enforcement. They have reported, made an outcry, some type of disclosure to us as law enforcement, or to a therapist or something like that, a mandatory reporter of some sort that made that to law enforcement. There are a ton of people who are victimized every single day who we never find out as law enforcement about because they go hidden, right? So they're out there. We don't necessarily see the overwhelming big pool that I speak about being kids that are scooped up or people that are scooped up and stored in a cage or anything like that. Instead, they're held captive through all these tactics that Sister Jeanne talked about. Coercion, the circumstances with the relationship, trauma bonding, all the different things that she touched upon today. Those things that keep those folks around. Apply the domestic violence principles that we're also well versed in, right? Where we know where people don't feel free to leave a situation because of circumstances. All these hurdles in place, they gotta find a place to stay. Who can I trust next? That emotional bond. Apply those to a trafficking victim, and that's what keeps them there. And that's where those vulnerabilities come in because it's all a big circle just to keep everybody inside of it, right? So where they can't just walk away. So the captive piece of that, kids scooped up off the street, sometimes they are associated with trafficking, sometimes they're just a predator of some sort, seeking that sexual gratification without the commercial value, without the trafficking portion of that, and it could be other things. So what we do is what we teach our law enforcement officers is no matter the circumstance, no matter how you contact a person, dig deeper and ask more questions to see what the underlying effect is. Is it just a domestic violence call that you're going on where this person or these people are beating upon each other or arguing or fighting? What's behind that? What's their relationship? Is it a traditional relationship or is it something else? Is it a trafficking scenario or something?
Is there anything that, if a child gets scooped, obviously, there's some sort of little window that we're gonna say, okay, something's up. And then beyond that, we're calling the police. Is there anything else we should be doing? And is there, gosh, maybe I watch too much TV, but you always hear, hey, within, 24, 48 hours, if you don't find the kid, your chances of finding the kid are next to nothing. Cast some real life, perspective on the Hollywood scenario, if you would, as to what is that kind of time frame, and what should we be doing?
Yeah, so, I'm sorry. Do you want to take
Well,
this?
one of the things, once you know, you need to talk to your kids, whatever their age, in an age-appropriate way on what to be aware of and what to do if it's not right, doesn't feel right. Now, if you're talking about kidnapping and scooping off the streets, that's different because the kid doesn't have any control on that. But other ordinary situations, if you've got I was talking about, that communication with them so they know and they understand.
Preventative, yes.
Yeah, preventative kind of thing. That's a piece of it.
Sure. Speaking just real briefly off topic about the abduction piece of that. So yes, the statistics that you see out there about hours and things like that, those are put together by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and by evaluating a case-by-case basis, and they know that the longer period of time that goes on, the more grim circumstances appear, right? And that's why finding the person, because if we jump a bunch of law enforcement out there right around and get our community gathered around to look for a missing kid who may have been scooped up and abducted, obviously we throw a ton of resources at it, we can check around, we can grab all this really fresh evidence and hopefully catch them quicker. That's the goal with that. So if it's an abduction case, by all means, don't delay. Even if your kid's not home and there's a bad feeling about something, call, get some extra set of eyes. That's what we're all there for, is to protect those kids. All right.
Prince,
She had a question over.
Are they all traffickers, all the pimps?
Say that again, sir.
Are all pimps traffickers?
Not necessarily, because what we say is the statutory definition that law enforcement has to go upon. The question was, are all pimps traffickers? In a sense and socially And if we want to diagnose it that way, yes, but from a legal law enforcement standpoint, not necessarily, because there's a criminal act of two adult people who are complicit and working together who want to engage in this behavior. That is a criminal act, right? And those are the circumstances. Now, underlying all the other stuff we know and things we talked about, we know from this side of the room, that's a trafficking scenario. But we can't say without a doubt legally that it is.
Yeah. We have some questions over here. Yes.
If we know that pornography is a direct correlation, or at least has some substance to being a factor in trafficking, what are we doing, or is there anything being done to prevent the traffickers of tomorrow by working with kids today to get them away from that?
Well, again, you back right into parent, grandparent, guardian. You know, what's your kid looking at on the internet? Where's the computer? Where's their phone? Where's their iPad? Do you know where it is? Do you have control? And then let's talk about how do we educate our kids to have respect for other people? And, you know, I brought some my body safety rules, this kind of stuff.
It seems to me that by the time we get here, it's
Well, these
almost...
are elementary kids,
Mhm.
primary kids. But part of that is the responsibility at home to talk with your kids and, you know, what's appropriate to look at or not look at. And, you know, what's in your house.
Well, trust me, I'm not trying to slough that off. I don't have children of my own, but I'd like to be active in
Yeah.
preventing.
And there are a number of, I know some of the parishes on the Missouri side are actively trying to address the issues of pornography. And why is it, you know, so attractive to persons? You know, I can't answer why somebody would watch pornography.
Well, it just seems to me that we put so much focus on how to recognize and what to do on the backside of it. Why don't we spend more time on the preventative measures? And
It's all around education. I mean, I don't know how to, you got any ideas
I'll
on
just
that
add on.
one?
I'll just add on real quick. It's a social issue, right? So
Yeah.
it's a social structure issue, and we're not going to be able to diagnose that necessarily here. But what Sister Jeanne says is right. It all kind of starts at the baseline relationship and how we teach people how to effectively communicate with others, how to build healthy, happy relationships, and things like that. So that's what we need to drive forward and push to our youth. Is that be good to you yourself, be good to other people, and if you see someone else being taken advantage of, step in to try to prevent that piece of it. So there are groups out there, and they're working on that piece of it that I have heard about. So at least preventing violence against women and those type of cultures. So the younger men that are growing up, teaching them to be good men. So.
And I know in Omaha, there's a whole group who do plays, and it's around not necessarily pornography, but appropriate behavior, relationship building, and so on. And those are done in elementary schools. So that's another way to approach it. Yeah, back there.
So I don't have children of my own, but I'm an avid traveler with my job, and I use Airbnb and Lyft and Uber. Like, do you see cases coming out from people using those? And if not, great. And then two, do you have any tips for like identifying anything that looks strange, or like avoiding certain things on those websites, or avoiding them completely?
When you say the websites, are you talking about those rideshare apps that you're talking about, or something different?
Yeah, the rideshare and Airbnb.
Okay, so yeah, rideshare, Airbnb, sharing your spaces and things like that. General safety tips apply to that. We have seen crossover, but it's more of a situation where a person, in an effort to, the folks who are traffickers, these enterprise level people, right, they're supposed to be really good at their jobs, and their job is to insulate themselves from the criminal element. So I don't necessarily want to be out there where I can be seen and picked up and identified by law enforcement, where I can be charged and held criminally liable for my conduct. Instead, I want to put this person who I'm taking advantage of in this situation out there on their own, and let the power of my coercion and my relationship and all this stuff go to work, instead of me being right over top of them, ready to threaten to beat them if they don't go do this type of sex act. Instead, they're using some of our other options that we have. We talk about rideshare that's available. So instead of me, if I'm a pimp or a trafficker in a situation, instead of me leaving our location to travel to the buyer, I may send her or that person who's being trafficked in a rideshare to go to the location to meet the client. So that's kind of the only crossover I have seen, the delivery mechanism that are there. Airbnb and VRBO, any type of the sharing of spaces where you're renting out a place, much like a hotel, it offers that anonymity, right? So if you know that the apartment next to you or the house next to you is rented out to people on a timeshare basis or anything like that, it's not uncommon for you as a neighbor to see people moving in and out, right? So you may think that's a little bit more normal and a little bit more anonymous. So any situation like that, we tend to see exploited a little bit. I can't say there's a huge uptick in it. I have seen cases and I've heard stories about people using those type of settings to engage in that commercial sex or in that trafficking scenario, but I wouldn't say it's like a huge uptick. It's just another opportunity for somebody to take advantage of.
And the Airbnb is another whole area that we've started talking about. How do we educate them in the same way that we have educated hotels and motels?
Great point.
Okay, one more. Oh, there's a couple in the back, okay.
We have a lot of kids, like in Overland Park, that live on the streets. I mean, we seem like, I mean, we're kind of isolated from that, but do we see a lot of that?
I don't live over here.
No, it's okay. Come from a little bit different neighborhood. More often than not, the people that we see in our community that are challenged with any type of homelessness are going to be jumping around, kind of couch surfing is the term that's used in that situation. So they might find a friend or a family member, because we do have a decent community where folks are able to kind of move forward. So if I'm fighting with my parents and I run away from home, I may kind of snowball the next set of parents and let them know, like, hey, it's okay, my parents said I could stay here, and then they kind of couch surf friend to friend. So those are typically temporary homelessness situations. The long-term homelessness with a core collective group of people does happen in our community for sure. There are outreach resources that are available, not only run by Johnson County, but by other faith-based groups around too. So your law enforcement partners are pretty good at that. So if you see a situation, that's a situation we want to come out and check someone's welfare. So, and it's not to come out and get them in trouble or take them away or anything like that, or push them off a property or send them away. It's more of coming out to see what we can do and how we can connect them to resources in our community. So we would want to call on that so we could come check it out.
Okay, there are a couple in the back.
So, do you find that most people are, I don't know, like, maybe it's a mixed bag of both, but are people more coerced? Like, you talked about that interaction, they kind of get a sense, are they like easy prey, or are people just like plain abducted, like, you're walking in your car and you get a gun to your head. You're taken that way, like forcefully, just out of nowhere. I mean, is it kind of both, or is it more of a conversation, like someone talks to you and you're kind of like, you know what I mean, like a weird vibe person kind of thing? Or
The question really is, or do we see more persons abducted with force or lured in other ways? And generally speaking, they're not abducted. There may be a few cases of that, but overall, they're lured in other ways. Yeah. Yeah, you're probably pretty safe. If they're going to take a gun to you, they probably want your car or your purse or something. Let's hope anyway. We had one question over here.
There are a lot of immigrants that are not documented, and yet they're being trafficked, even by the landlords, that you can't pay the rent, then I'll take it out in trade. My question is there anything, they can't come forward because they would be deported. How did they, if we know something like that, how did they get help?
Yeah, there are some protections in place for that circumstance. Let me talk about that for just a second. So the question was, there's a lot of undocumented persons that we have maybe in our community that might be being victimized through trafficking, whether it's labor or something else. And the hurdles that exist for those victims to come forward to report for fear of not only retribution from their trafficker, but then the system, right? The system, the government, going to throw them back into a country in a bad situation where they came from. So there are protections. It's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that exists. It was that's really where all our anti-trafficking laws took place and all came to shape in the United States government. Part of the TVPA is a protection for people. So if you're identified as a victim of trafficking, and it's because of your status of being outside the United States or a foreign national of some sort, you actually have protection and can remain in the United States and actually get citizenship. Not only you, but we can also work to try to get your family, if they're from a foreign country, moved here and taken care of by that means.
Then I think you need to start telling these people that fact, that if they're being trafficked, because they're holding that over their head.
Right. That's a great.
This is the first time that I've heard someone say that.
Yeah, those protections exist. The coercion, that's really one of the key components in law enforcement that we look for in those scenarios. If we feel that someone is being trafficked through labor, especially because they're a foreign national, more often than not, the piece of coercion that's being used to control and manipulate them and victimize them is their status or lack thereof in the country. And they know, because of language barriers and stereotypes and other cultural barriers that exist, that they can't necessarily come forward. So us, the folks wearing the badges that do the investigation, have to try to gain the trust of that person. Can you imagine jumping over all the hurdles and the stuff that they have built up in their head of what they expect to happen, that they're going to be put on a bus and sent back to whatever country or flown back to whatever country they came from? So we have to break down those barriers. But the education piece of that is the hard part, right? Because I have to find a way to reach that audience. I have to find a way to find them. And if I can find them as law enforcement, I'd like to try to help them right then rather than just educate them about the circumstance. So that's where we do these community groups, much like this, and we learn about these things so that we can help go out, proliferate this information, share it amongst our friends so that we see those people in bad situations, know you shouldn't feel necessarily bad about reporting that, because the ultimate end goal is to help protect them from the circumstances of being victimized through trafficking, and that if we can make them a better person and kind of get them to a good state, a good situation where they're better off, that's our goal.
Okay, it's 8:20 almost, so you've been wonderful and very attentive. I will hang around for a few minutes, and I'm assuming you will.
Sure.
And so thank you all very much. Appreciate you coming.